Hey, and welcome to the Bible Reading Journey podcast. We're so glad you're back this week. We are in episode 47. How many weeks in a year?
52. Almost there.
We're getting close to that.
That will mark our 25% mark of the journey because we have 4 years of the Bible Reading Journey to get through the entire Bible.
The good news is we are going to continue next year. I mean, that is a thing. Where's my thing at? Do you see it around here? Hold on.
Here.
We got it. Next year's is printed, ready to
is.
go.
It is.
This is what next year's looks like.
Press.
Hot off the press. It's hot. So that's coming. We will continue. So if you were worried about that, December is coming, then January, you're like, what about next year? We will continue.
We're really excited because we've had a great time this first year, and we've discovered so many things ourselves that God has laid on our hearts to talk about and just to reveal in our own lives. I can't wait to see what He's going to do next year.
So thank you for being part of it. And we're back setting up this way because Ellis is sick this week. So we wish Ellis well and that he'd get better quickly. And that, but here we are again, inviting you in. So inviting you guys into the conversation. So we are in Deuteronomy this week, Deuteronomy 10, 11, 12, Psalms 46, and Luke 2 this week. And I saw some really awesome connections between Deuteronomy and Luke 2 this week that were pretty incredible. And I was like, oh, it's amazing. I think Keith is the one who may have kind of put these pieces together for us. And through the Holy Spirit, there are some great connections that I've seen multiple times. But yeah, we're going to starting Deuteronomy, and we'll do our best to get as much conversation on Luke as we can. Awesome.
A lot to talk about. Yeah,
Craig, why don't you go ahead and jump us in, kind of give us coordinate where we are in Deuteronomy and all the things.
Happy to. So again, we're into kind of the last two chapters of Moses setting up his sermon for the people of Israel. As then in 12 through 26, he'll start getting to more of what's typically known as a second recounting of the law. It's actually a misnomer to think of it as the second law, which I know we talked about the name Deuteronomy meaning second law, but it's actually a recounting of the law to call Israel back to obedience to the law that's already been given, and to flesh parts of that law out based on, now that they know more of who they are, based on their narrative and what they've been through with God.
Maybe
He's going to give more context.
Maybe instead of second law, we can say like a second recounting, like a second giving of the same law for the second generation.
I
think that helps.
Totally agree. And so in this section, we'll, especially in chapters 10 and 11, we'll see Moses continue to give a basis for why the first commandment is so important and why it's the foundation of not only Israel's life and their relationship with God, but who they are as a chosen people. And then, of course, 12 is the chapter we end on in Deuteronomy this week. It will start to expand out some of the practical living and aspects of Israel's life, of what it means to live life according to the first commandment.
Yeah, I was thinking about this week. This is the last section of really good narrative before we get into just like all the law. Like there's no narrative for quite a while. So really enjoy this week. Yeah. Dig into the narrative as we come in. And you were talking about how this is Noah, because we were talking about Noah in the pre-talk. We were talking about Noah in the pre-talk, and so it was in my brain. Moses here, pardon me, is giving his little sermons, I like him kind of like a halftime speech, halftime of a game, and he's giving this talk, and he's saying, remember these really important commandments? The first two are the most important, and those are all about loving God. And he's really digging deep in here. So what do you have for us on those?
Kind of getting to the first, or the 6 verses around chapter 10, verses 14 through 19. For me, that's really where the meat of this section is. We get in my Bible, the NRSV has the title section, The Essence of the Law here. But as we get into this section, it's really what the essence of right living, to use your meaning for righteousness that you gave us last week, Amber. This is what righteousness, right living, right relationship with God looks like. Yeah. And it's important to continue to ground Israel and by extension us in the first 2 commandments, because you can't get right relationship with each other right if you don't have right relationship with God right. So grounding in that right relationship with God, what that looks like for Israel in their corporate life, and as an extension for us, life in Jesus, life with each other in the church, especially in life with the broader world, you got to start there, right? So we start to get several repeating frames here in 14, 15, 16 as a triplet, and then 17, 18, and 19, which gives a series of declarations of who God is, and as a refrain, who Israel should be as a consequence. And so, in a lot of ancient Middle Eastern literature, you'll see, some talks about national gods. They'll glorify or give reasons why their national god is so great, why the radiant glory of the national god is as it should be, and why they should worship that. And then as a refrain, they'll talk about why their national king is so great, and it's usually because the national king is a reflection of the radiance of that national god. Well, here we see our God, the God of Israel, the God of Jesus, is different, and this is a continued pattern we've seen. A lot of documents in the Old Testament, a lot of stories in the Old Testament, compare who God is with who they expected God to be, as if he was like other gods around them. And the documents in the Old Testament, stories in the Old Testament, will show why God is different than every other God. Well, here we see in the reflection of who God is for Israel, he's great. Therefore, who's going to get that reflection in Yahweh's light? It's going to be the poor, the oppressed, and the alien. You see that really called out here in this section.
Interesting. So what I think I heard you say, maybe just to help make sure it all came across, what I think I heard you say was most ancient gods, like in kings and what's the right word? Anyways, what happens is they are reflective on, the God is reflective on how good or great the people are.
Yep.
You are saying, Yahweh here is saying the opposite. His people are great because of who God is.
Exactly.
It is the exact opposite of all things they're used to.
And I think that, and even a king for most nations was great because of their God, but here the radiance and reflection of our God is on the lowly, the meek, the mild, not the powerful.
Yeah.
It's not the powerful that benefit from the rule, the sovereign and universal rulership of Yahweh God. It's the lowly, the meek, the mild, the oppressed, the alien, the orphan.
Yeah, and I think you said the word radiance just now, reminds me of the word that we use for holy quite often, which we kind of filtered out, tried a little bit last week, where we talk about holiness is not necessarily about what the person does and who they are or the choices they make. It's about their proximity to the Holy One. Right. We just talked about that last week, and so what I hear you saying is they are the reflection is because those meek and lowly and all those, it's because God is in their midst that makes them reverent and grand and great and holy, not the other way around. I think that's beautiful. I did not see that when I read this. Yep. I love that. Thank you for.
What did you find?
Yeah, what did I find?
You always have great stuff too.
I think in the same similar section, I was in 10:12. This one stood out to me the most. It says, "And now Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you?" And I was like, oh, I should pay attention. This seems like I'm about to get a good summary. I love a good summary. Like, I love reading the Bible, and I love reading things, but then if you give me a good summary version, like Cliff Notes, this is what's happening here. It's like all the things you're about to know, all the laws I'm about to give you, this is it.
It's almost like a summation of, I've been talking for 9 chapters, now I'm going to tell you the Cliff Notes version.
It is. This is it. Yeah, this is the Cliff Notes of the last 9 chapters. Here we go. And now Israel, what does your Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God. Number 1, to fear God. Number 2, to walk in all of his ways. Number 3, to love him. Simple enough. 4, it's simple but hard. 4, to serve God, your Lord God, with all of your heart, with all of your soul. So back to Deuteronomy 6, the Shema prayer, right? Number 5, and to keep the commandments and the statutes of the Lord, which he had commanded you. I'm commanding you today for your good. 5 things. I mean,
wow. When you distill it down to that level, that seems pretty possible and doable, right?
It seems simple, but impossible to do it well.
I was going to say, if it's so easy, why do I keep messing it up every single day? And I think you made the distinction. It's simple, it's straightforward,
Yeah,
but it's not easy.
It's not easy.
Make no mistake.
Make no mistake. I thought maybe we'd take just a quick minute and talk about those 5 fasts. Do you think we can do that?
Yeah.
So the first one was to fear your Lord, your God. What does that mean, to fear? I mean, I'm literally, let's just.
Yeah, I think, this isn't the fear. This isn't the sense of fear of me over here cowering in the corner because I'm trembling that somebody's going to hurt me. This is I'm awestruck by the majesty of God. This is, we talk about fear and trembling, but it's like, oh, wow, it's just, whoa. It's just overawing. It's, we talk about the awesomeness of God, the awesomeness. It really is the sense that I'm awestruck.
Yeah.
And there's a reverence there.
There is a reference. There is. I agree. I wrote down the word. You said not cowering away. I wrote down. I think this is a healthy fear that does not make someone shrink back. Does not make you shrink back. But it is that you have this heart that so badly wants to honor God that you would hesitate to offend him.
Yeah.
It is a fear of God because you know who he is, you've seen what he can do, you know that he is creator, and without him you are nothing, right? Without him I am nothing. And it's a fear that your heart so much wants to honor him that you would absolutely hesitate to do anything to offend him, but the opposite, to obey him.
Right. I get this mental image just now of Chronicles of Narnia, and Aslan is C.S. Lewis's, he's the author of C.S. Lewis's embodiment of God in the land of Narnia. And Aslan the lion leaps and bounds and shows up just at the right time, of course. Just when the characters are in trouble and need God to show up, he's there in the form of the lion, but the lion roars, and you hear it from over the mountaintops and from the distance. And when he comes up to you in close personal proximity, it's just all most people can do is kneel in either reverence and worship, or if their hearts are right, or if they're anticipating his arrival, or they're shrinking back in fear. And this is where the cowardly part of fearing the God does come in. If they've done wrong, or they know that Aslan is there to defeat them because they've been working crossways of his purposes. So I think there's also a dual edge of fear here upon our Lord and our God is, if your heart is right, or if we're in Jesus, for Christians, we have nothing to fear from that sense. But for those who are outside the will of God, or not in Jesus, or for those who are not understanding of who God is, this is going to be a trembling fear invoked response, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. For some reason, I was just thinking of something I say a lot in my fitness classes. If you don't know, I teach a lot of fitness and rowing, and people can get to a place. So as a coach, my job is to get them to a place of on the edge of, like, they didn't know what else they're capable of, right? And sometimes it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You have to get really uncomfortable. And I usually say this phrase to them, and for some reason it does fit here. I say, right now, you have the opportunity. So this fear of the Lord is an opportunity to either lean in or give in. And I feel like if you have a healthy fear of Yahweh because you know who he is in your life, you tend to want to lean in and be drawn into the fear rather than give in and reflect and run away.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Totally agree.
Okay, so this number two. Number 2 was to walk in all his ways. What do we think? What's the first thing that comes to mind for you there?
I am struck by, Psalm 119, the longest psalm that has all the repetition of talking about God's laws, statutes, rules, commandments, and kind of it seems like this interplay between those words for his law and his word. So all of his ways, it's all the ways he's set before humans to be the most true human that he's created us to be, and for our potential to be realized as images of him, of God. And so what does it take for us to accomplish that and realize that potential is to walk in his ways. And
That's it.
Those are his ways, right? The laws, commandments, statutes, rules he's given us to live by. Ultimately, that way is Jesus, because he's the only one that has embodied all those ways of God.
Yeah, you keep saying following the law is his way. So it's almost like we pattern our day-to-day, on his law and understanding what he wants, not and on our own heart and desire, which is kind of the root of all of our flesh, isn't it?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
patterning our feet
Yep.
for what we want and what our hearts desire. It seems so simple to say, just follow in his paths. But yet, it is one of the most difficult things that we daily have to choose to.
It is. And we've seen a couple of places in Deuteronomy already where God has called Israel to write the law upon their hearts by meditating on it, on studying it, on praying on it, on making it part of who they are, thinking about it morning, noon, and night, when they rise up, when they go to bed. Teach it to your children.
Right on your door frames.
Right. So internalize it to yourself as a person, internalize it to yourselves as a people, and make it a part of who you are as humans.
Yeah. Simple, y'all. Simple. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. To love him. That was a simple one. To love him.
But what does it mean to love God and to trust God above loving ourselves or living out of fear?
Yeah, it's the Shema prayer. I mean, if you really want to, I think the best way to understand this one would to go back and really deep dive into Deuteronomy 6, that first section, the Shema prayer. We did not do that well, but to love your God with all of your soul, with all your heart, with all your strength. It's this concept of all capacity in every way, and with all of your might actually means with all of your muchness in Hebrew.
Muchness.
I love that word. Yeah, with all of your muchness. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, I think go study it. So that seems simple here, to love your God and serve him. I think that's just something we cannot get into this today. We just don't have time.
Yep.
To serve him. I think those two things are connected for a reason.
I mean, it goes to your point in chapter 6 about Shema and listening, having this aspect of responding to the word and obeying to the call or the command. That's what does that look like lived out? That's service. If you're loving God and you have a right relationship with him, to have right relationship with others and live out that love of God, you have to love others and serve, and that's service, right? That's serving others. That's what loving God looks like in action.
It is. I think if you love your spouse, you are going to serve them. I mean, those things really do go hand in hand.
And how much of that is right relationship?
Yeah, it's righteousness. We are playing out righteousness when we do that.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
It is remarkable. And then the next one is...
Keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his decrees, and I'm commanding you today for your own well-being.
Yeah.
That's interesting, for your own well-being. It's not capricious and arbitrary just so I can make you be restricted to these funny rules that I'll laugh about in the corner. That's not what God's saying. He's like, this is for your own well-being.
It's for your own good.
Yeah.
I actually wrote down the word to keep it. Actually, it's this idea of possession of the law and the commandments, but also protection, and keeping them because you understand how important they are. So it's like possession, I possess them, I do them, and also protection. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just wrote those words down. To keep them is more than just to understand them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're internalizing it again. The sense of meditating it and making it meditating on it and making it part of who you are. There's a sense of internalizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And he keeps saying today. And I just wanted to remind people really fast. It's interesting how everything so far in the Torah has been really slow.
Yeah.
I mean, Genesis was hundreds of years and hundreds of generations of people, right? And then it kind of slows down a little bit more when you get to Exodus. We have 400 years, and how many generations of people? I have my brain. 4 generations of people. And then you get to Exodus, and then you have 2 generations of people in 40 years, right? And then you have here, and all of Deuteronomy is really one day. It's slowing way down, which means it's really important. And so he keeps saying today, because the point is, he said all these things as a sermon, kind of his last, almost like dying breath in a way, because he does at the end.
He passes on after.
After this at the very end. Anyways, and then they do enter in, and so it's I think we forget that this is we think this is something that's happened over a long period of time. This is something they're digesting all at one time.
And it's funny, we know we have the benefit of the rest of the Old Testament. They didn't, of course, here in Deuteronomy, but the rest of the Old Testament, we know that they don't remain faithful to God. They don't walk in His ways. They don't fully love Him. They do in their own way, but they don't fully love Him as God demands. And we know that because God says as much in Micah 6, verse 8. And this is near the end of that era of prophecy in the Second Temple Judaism after the return of exile from Babylon. God is telling them, you still don't get it. You've been through the judges, you've been through kings, you've been through this period of national turmoil when Assyria and Babylon came in, conquered you, took you off to exile, let you come back. Nehemiah led you guys back, and you rebuilt the temple. You still don't get it. I don't know what to do with you guys, right? I've told you what it takes to love your God, to walk humbly, to follow my ways, and you're still messing it up. And then God goes silent for 400 years until Jesus comes. So this is almost, in Micah 6:8, that's almost a refrain of what he's saying here in Deuteronomy 12 and 13, in this section of Deuteronomy 10, where he's saying, this is what I'm telling you guys to do. I'm telling you at the beginning, I'll tell you at the end, because you're still not going to get it. Yeah. And then I'll have to come in Jesus and do it myself to show you.
Yeah. Let's move on. I think, Craig, you had an interesting chiasm that you're going to throw out to us.
Yeah, so there's a bigger chiasm going on, and again, a chiasm is literary structure used in ancient Middle Eastern literature especially, where you kind of sandwich points in stair-stepping or nesting fashion until you get to the center point, and then the stair-step in will be followed by parallels stair-steps out in the section. This chiasm it goes from Deuteronomy 6 verse 4 all the way multi-chapters. This is called I think they call it a mega chiasm, to chapter 11 verse 25. So again, Deuteronomy 6:4 through Deuteronomy 11:25. And the central thesis or the central axis of this chiasm, where it all pivots, and the central point is really what the author is trying to teach us, and the message they want us to focus on is Deuteronomy 9 verses 1 and 2. Hear, O Israel, you will go out to possess nations greater and mightier than yourself, even the Anakim. So again, we have this people, the Anakim, which we saw also in Deuteronomy 1 verse 28. And you have some great insights on who the Anakim were, because I never, who are these people? These are all ancient Near East names, and I get them all confused, but I know you've been following this thread.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually don't know much about the Anakim themselves. I actually been following the pattern. Yeah. And so when I see a certain pattern, it helps me go backwards. So I keep seeing this pattern over and over again, and it's brought me back to, once again, to the Genesis. I mean, that first thread in Genesis. This group of people you're talking about here in Deuteronomy, they keep being described as these mighty, big, giant men, these mighty warrior kings. These, not only are they warrior kings in the sense that they were grand and that they had big fortified cities, but literal giants, large people, and they keep describing them throughout. We see them in Numbers, and we see them in Deuteronomy. We see it in Numbers when the spies go out and they go check out the land and they come back. They're like, there are giants in there, and they describe these different groups.
And you can see a rendition of that report of the spies in Deuteronomy 128.
In 128, you see it again there. And then you actually get more detail of these warrior kings and how big they really were. In Deuteronomy, he actually describes one of their beds and how big the bed was. I think it was Org, I think is the one that describes it, or Og or something like that. I can't pronounce words.
Even Og sounds like the name of a giant.
It does. It's a great name, by the way. Great name. Anyways, I've been following this thread, and I hadn't really brought it up too much throughout our podcast because it's one of those things that's hard to kind of wrap our minds around, but I'm hoping to do a decent job today. And it's funny because it relates to Luke today, which I think was really interesting. To me, it did. I found a connection there. Back in Genesis 6:4, we actually get the introduction of the Nephilim. Some people say the Nephilim. I don't think it matters. We see this introduction, and they are described as these giant, mighty men. These mighty men. The men of the name is also where they're kind of described, and we see that throughout. These Nephilim this is not exclusively said in the scripture, but it's kind of implied and understood when you read it in the Hebrew. But the Nephilim are the descendants of fallen angels. This is what I'm not alone in this theory, and some people might disagree, but this is just a theory, so you can take it and go with it how you want. But they are angels that have fallen, and they see women, and they see them as good in their own eyes.
Well, it comes from verse 2, right?
Yeah.
Because in Genesis 6, starting in verse 1, when people began to multiply on the face of the ground, the daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. So that sons of God
the
is
sons of God is the
about.
reference to what I'm talking about. It's not something I made up. That's that reference. Some people see that reference as these fallen. They're basically these mighty men. These Nephilim are these half-breed angel humans. And what's interesting is we know that the purpose of the enemy, the purpose of their number one sole focus is to mess up God's plan for a righteous remnant. They know the plan. And they know that the righteous remnant, the ultimate righteous remnant, was going to be from the seed of a woman. They know that from the fall. It's from the seed of a woman. So what better way to then try to default or to mess up God's plan than to go into the woman and say, I'm going to go and I'm going to literally defect. Is that the right word? The seed of the woman. And they created these descendants of very large, giant humans. That's what we see them. What's funny about here in Genesis, you may notice in verse 4, the narrator, the author, Moses, actually whispers to us and says, and therefore after, and also after. It's like a little whisper, and you're going to see them again. And the reason that's important is because if these were actual real humans, they would have been destructed. They did not, they would have been gone with the flood, with everybody else.
The flood follows this.
The flood follows this. Yeah. And so they would have been gone. And so it's like him whispering, and they're going to return because they're not just men. Right. They're just not human. They are also angels. And so that's what happens. And we see them again in Numbers 13 is when we get introduced to them again. And that's when they come back from the report. And they come back with that report. And it says, the Nephilim, remember those I was going to tell you about before? I'm flipping to it, y'all. Sorry. Here it is. In verse 32. And so they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land, though which we have spied out, is a land that is devours its inhabitants and all the people. And they saw that were giant heights, so they were really tall. And we saw the Nephilim, the son of Anakim. How do you say that? Anakim, who came from the Nephilim. And it's in quotes. It's in quotes. It's he's like, remember when I said they will return? Yep. Here's the moment they're returning. What I think we're supposed to see here is that the fallen angels, the enemy, they are still attempting to affect the seed of the woman. Yep. And they also know that they have a promised land in Canaan. And so what do? They inhabit Canaan. They're trying to default all of God's plans for his people. So they're like, haha, I'm going to get you. Not only are we going to make these giant warrior kings and make them grand into the big kings, but we're going to go into the land that God has promised his people. Yeah. Because he knows out of the people is going to come the seed of the woman, which is going to be Jesus. And that's what we're going to see in Luke 2, is the seed of the woman. Basically what we're saying is, because we read Luke 2 here this week, is they fail. Yeah. They fail drastically.
But they try.
They do try.
Try mightily.
They do. And I think that's what we're supposed to see here as they keep mentioning these giants throughout Deuteronomy. It's like a thread, and because we've already talked about last week how them entering into the land is kind of like their own flood. Right. Like they're coming in and washing out, once again, not just the sin of the people who have become terrible and great, and the blood is crying from the ground, but also it's the same destruction and devastation that we saw before the flood because of the entry in of the Nephilim and the enemy coming into these people and just
they're so polluted they're infecting the ground itself, the earth itself. The creation itself is and Paul says this, that the creation groans and begs for relief. This is why, right? And the sinfulness and evilness of humanity, and in particular the Nephilim and Anakim and the surrounding Canaanite tribes during this period, they've so polluted the ground that the creation itself is warped and twisted in on itself in ways that aren't natural.
And I was looking up the Anakim and kind of like what happened and when did they kind of, like, where does this come from? And I thought it was fascinating. This is an Amber theory. I have not actually looked up if anyone else has the same thing. I'm sure there's someone out there. But this is something I just kind of, as we were pre-talking, this is when it came up. So like this is like a fresh idea out of my brain. After Noah, so we have the righteous remnant of Noah coming out of the flood and his family coming off, and he plants a garden. You're like, hooray, a new Eden. Right?
Yep.
That's a good thing he plants a garden.
Yep.
That's exactly what we want in a new Eden. Yay. And then he gets drunk and goes naked. You're like, naked, oh no, something bad's going to happen. It's about to happen. We know the last time the humans were naked, this turned out bad. And then it says one of his sons, and it talks about the son of Ham, comes in and he does something we don't know what it is, but we know it's not good. And to the point where Noah actually curses whom? Ham? No, who does he curse? Canaan.
Ham's son.
Ham's son.
Which just seems weird, right?
Canaan.
If you're just reading, you would think, hey, Ham did something to Noah. Why isn't Noah cursing Ham? What did you find?
Yeah, so I thought to myself, I started digging around in our pre-talk. I was like flipping around, but I believe that the reason why is because the thing that happened in the tent didn't happen to Noah. I think it happened to Noah's wife, Ham's mother, and out of that sinful thing that happened came a seed, and the seed was Canaan. And the Canaan was then cursed by Noah, and that's why you see this line of Ham. That's where these giant warrior kings come from Ham, and they come from Canaan. Yeah. So you almost see that this line of people starting straight off literally the boat, which is like a funny. I didn't think that was a pun. I didn't mean to make a pun. Straight off the boat.
It's a good one.
It was a good pun. It was a good pun, unintentionally. Anyways, I think that's where this all comes from. So it's interesting that. Anyways, I don't know if that makes sense, but.
And the scripture reference for that story that you're referencing is Genesis 9 verses 18 through 27 or so. So yeah, go read that and you'll see that the curse is on Canaan, and talking about. Kind of what's the incident about, Ham with the nakedness of his father? What does that mean? And I've actually, not for this week, but a long time ago, I studied some of the Hebrew words behind that phrase there that's used for, and Ham did, what Ham did with the nakedness of his father. And there's three theories that I've read about anyway. One's that Ham castrated Noah and compromised his ability to have more sons. So therefore, since that impacted Noah's son, Noah was going to impact Ham's son by cursing Canaan, which to me is kind of weird because then don't you love your grandkids too? I don't know. But then the second theory was that Ham basically molested Noah in some inappropriate way. And then the third one was that he slept with Noah's wife, Ham's own mother. And so because of that, the seed would, in your theory, would come from that third inappropriate coupling.
Well, good. I'm glad that you've seen that elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, good. That makes me feel actually better about that. But it's just interesting that you have the line of Ham, which becomes the people who are described here as the giants, and then you have them in the land of Canaan, and the Canaanites also have these giant warrior kings as well.
And the Canaanites are the people from Canaan who was cursed by
Noah. Yeah. So it's just interesting how the enemy is literally drawn out into that line. So you have these two lines, bloodlines, and one leads to Jesus and one leads to
death and destruction.
Death and destruction.
So why is all this important? It's exactly what she has said. It's because the Israelites are coming in. We've talked the last 2 or 3 weeks about God telling Israel to destroy the Canaanites, not necessarily destroy all the people, because he's subsequently told them not to intermarry with them, not to follow their customs, etc. But to totally destroy them in the sense of totally destroying their religious customs and the cultural aspects of polytheism that would lead to that would be a temptation to idolatry on the part of Israel. So God is using the message here in this chiasm and in this broader literary structure here to tell them, be careful, do what I say, because the Anakim, and they represent the broader enemy, so the broader enemy is here and is going to press against you and try to thwart my purposes and my plan for redemption. And I need y'all to be holy and separate, because not just because I'm trying to be a prick about it, it's because the entire salvation of the world and putting the world back together hinges on you guys doing what I'm asking you to do.
Yeah.
It's that important.
It is that important. And I think we forget sometimes when we read it, there's more than just human sin happening here. It is the enemy is trying to stop that plan.
Yeah.
And the people have to follow through and enter into that land.
So talking about the ultimate way of how he's going to fulfill his plan, should we go to Luke 2?
Exactly. I already flipped to it because I think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
It's appropriate. Talk about the seed and them failing at their trying. Luke 2 this week, we have the birth narrative, and as I entered into it, I was like, I really hope to open it with fresh eyes and something new, because this is not only is it the birth narrative, but it's the one that most people read for Christmas time.
Yep.
And so it's a very common one. And Craig, I'll let you go ahead and get us started on this topic.
Yeah, I'll give 2 observations up top, and we can get into more if we have time, but we probably won't. So I at least want to get these 2 out. In Luke, in the first section of Luke, we talk about in those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. So even in the first verse of Luke, we have, again, Luke setting up this compare and contrast between the 2 rulers of the world. Yeah. The Emperor Augustus, he's away in his faraway imperial city of Rome and issuing decrees that affects the lives of millions. He doesn't even know them, but he's still affecting their day-to-day lives. Versus Jesus, who's the ruler of the universe, and he's born in a manger, and we know he's a king because he's from the bloodline of David, and plus Mary, we just read, she sang about it, inspired by the Holy Spirit, in chapter 1. But Jesus, in compare and contrast to Emperor Augustus, is going to rule with mercy and compassion for the poor. And so we immediately have this contrast that was set up.
Before you move on to your option 2 or your observation number 2, it says in those days, and I wrote right above it, and not once upon a time.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's not once upon a time.
It's
in
real,
these days.
These are real events grounded in history.
That's it. Exactly what I.
And actually, and to kind of play on that further, in verse 2, this was the first registration that was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. So again, we're grounding it in real events, because these were Quirinius, as being the governor of Syria, is recorded in other ancient texts, especially Roman texts. Generally, we think Quirinius came to power in AD 7, so that would have been, that's generally if we think Jesus, scholars think Jesus was born between 2 and 4 BC. So if we read the text literally as we have in our English translation, at least I have it in our NRSV, while Quirinius was governor, these things happened about the census and the decree from Augustus. Well, that doesn't seem to be following right. So some people might say, well, there goes the Bible again messing up. Actually, that Greek word that's translated while in our English is protos. It could also mean before.
That's right.
So this really should be taken as this census, this registration was taken before Quirinius was governor.
Yeah, my ESV version actually makes a note of that before. So that when we were talking about that, I was like, it's before. Yeah. And so I didn't actually catch that was an issue until you had mentioned that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not the only one that was struggling with that. My second point, and we can talk about this as much or as little as we have time for, but again on chiasms, I'm seeing them everywhere these days.
You know how I got really into trees for a while? Yeah. You've gotten into the chiasms lately, and I like it.
It's like wild. I don't know. It's maybe God is leading us on paths, and these are tools you can use, right?
Yeah.
And we'll probably focus in on some of them for a while, then kind of back out of those and focus in on others as we go. But these are tools that we're learning about as we go too, and hopefully you're picking up as useful. But
it doesn't make any sense for us to always be the ones who bring out all the beauty in the gold. We want to teach you how to mine it for yourself.
And these are tools that you can use.
These are tools you can use.
Emphasizing them along as we go, just to show you that they're not one-offs or flukes, but and they're relevant to the Old and New Testament.
And that almost brings more authenticity to the scriptures being a full-on narrative from start to finish, that they're using the same kind of concepts and way of communicating throughout.
Especially since chiasms weren't even used again mostly until the Middle Ages, at least in Western literature. Yeah.
That's news.
They kind of disappeared for a long time.
I love that.
So anyway, this chiasm goes from the last thanks a lot. Yeah, last verse of chapter 1, Luke 180, all the way to Luke 2:52, and the central thesis there, if I can find my notes, is in Luke 2 verse 21. And when 8 days were completed for the circumcision of the child, his name was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. So again, we have the entire central axis of this literary component here is Jesus and his circumcision. And so what does that mean?
I was going to say, like, if the purpose of a chiasm is to kind of zoom into a central focus, something you really want to laser into, what does that mean? Why is that? Why, out of all this, why is the circumcision the thing that's so important?
Yeah. So what I think, and what I was kind of led to see this week, was this is tying Jesus back to the people of Israel. And the people of Israel were, in a sense, fashioned and formed from the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 15, 16, 17. And what came out of that as Israel's piece, or their side of the covenant to keep and obey, it was circumcision. God called them to be circumcised physically. And we read in the Deuteronomy chapters this week about circumcision of the heart. When Paul talks about circumcision of the heart in Romans, he doesn't just pull that out of thin air. He gets it from the Old Testament. This is an idea that's threaded throughout the Old Testament as well. So that was what I picked up out of Jesus being circumcised here. He is a real person in time. He's a real Hebrew little boy, and he's following the real Hebrew law of circumcising your sons on the 8th day.
Yeah, I first of all, I love that it did connect this week's readings and circumcision of the heart in Deuteronomy. I was like, there's a great connection that was unintentional. I love it. And then I also went back to the Genesis passage where the original covenant with Abraham and what it meant, what it mean for them to be circumcised, and it had to do with this concept of them. So when they do that, they're saying, I'm entering into a covenant with you. Yeah. And when I'm, as a sign of your covenant, that oath word we talked about since like episode 3.
Yeah, since the fall, I think.
Like literally since episode 3, we've been talking about this word oath, this sign, and so here we are back into these signs of this covenant here. But as I was thinking and reflecting on what it meant to have this covenant, I was like, wait, technically, Jesus, the Son of God, Savior of the world coming in, did not necessarily have to be circumcised in the sense of the meaning of circumcision. He
was free of sin.
He was free of sin. There was no reason for it. And so I wrote down this note. I said, wow, Jesus was born without sin, spotless lamb, without blemish, yet at 8 days old, he is already bearing the sins of many.
Wow. So we have him connected back in time to his people, Israel. And we have him connected, back in time also, but also forward in time, all time, bearing the sins of all the people.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I didn't catch that.
It just hit me. I was like, it's just interesting that he didn't have to have it, and yet he didn't have to be baptized. We'll talk about that in a few weeks, because he'll be in here in Luke. We'll talk about that again. Yeah. Interesting. I was surprised that was the middle of the chiasm out of this whole section, and when you put that up in our pre-talk, I was really excited about it. It makes me wonder what Luke's intentions were. Like, I have a theory of what kind of stuck out to you. You have a theory. People have different theories of why. And it makes me sometimes really, really, really want to be like, Luke, why was that the central focus?
And I think we've seen in Luke 1 and 2 that Luke is going through great pains to tie Jesus' life and who he is all through the various Old Testament themes.
Yes.
And it's like every aspect of what was important about the Old Testament is being pulled forward into Jesus and who he is and what his life is going to be about.
Yeah, good call. Well, now that we've talked about their circumcision for 8 days later, why don't we talk about before that? I thought it was fascinating that really the birth of Jesus is one of the greatest events in history. I mean, and yet, like, the most popular version of us reading that is 2 lines. Oh. It is here in Luke 2, but it's 2 lines. I mean, it literally says, and she brought forth her first son. And you're like, oh.
That's it?
The most important moment in history is and she brought forth. I just thought that was, like, for some reason that really struck me, and you know that Luke is going great pains to give us these details, so yet this is all he wrote down. And so then I thought, okay, then what does he tell us? If that's all he's going to say, what does he tell us? And so then I kind of focused in on the part where he talks about, and she gave, and then she wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for him in the inn. And so I was like, okay, if Luke has been going in great pains, and yet all we have here is this one line of the greatest moment in history, what am I supposed to notice here? And for some reason, the word swaddling clothes kind of caught my eye, and so I kind of looked into it in the Greek. And in the Greek, this swaddling clothes actually is more, not like a fancy blanket we have nowadays, or a physical swaddle that Velcros for us. It was actually more of torn cloth, a torn piece of cloth that they would wrap in. Excuse me. And so as I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about the manger, it just struck me all of a sudden that, wow, starting at the beginning of Luke is writing this in a way of Jesus is originally introduced with him being stripes wrapped around him, wrapped with stripes, and laid in a cross. Laid in a manger, a wooden manger, and then Luke ends with him being wrapped in stripes again, and then laid on a cross. And I just thought that just struck me so deeply this week, and I had never thought about that before.
Yeah, Luke has been brilliant about setting up who Jesus is, and we're going to see callbacks to the first 2 or 3 chapters in the final 2 or 3 chapters around the death and burial especially, and kind of grounding who Jesus is in his birth and death. And we'll see those themes interweave throughout his life. So get ready, because it's going to be a wild ride. But Luke's narrative is brilliant about calling those dimensions out of Jesus' character and life.
It will. The other thing that stuck out to me this week that I had not noticed before is I was thinking about the angels showing up to the shepherds, and I was just kind of reflecting on this, and maybe you've heard this before as you're listening to this, but it struck me. I was like, wait, these shepherds are really close to Jerusalem and to the temple. And so I have this thought, or maybe, just maybe, that these were the very lambs that are going to be used for the temple sacrifices. These are the temple lambs, potentially.
Yeah.
And so the very men that tended to the sacrifice lambs for the temple sacrifice are the same men or women, same shepherds, who actually are the first ones that get to see the Savior, the Lamb, like God's. I just think that was, for some reason, that just felt right. I don't know if it is right. I have no way of knowing if that is right, but it just felt right that would just be so.
I agree, and we just read in Deuteronomy 10 about the reflection of God's radiance being upon the poor and the lowly and the afflicted. And here we have the lowliest of the low in ancient Israeli culture and society being the shepherds.
Yeah.
Shepherds, there's many books that talk about this. I remember there's one, I can't remember the author, there's one book on Psalm 23 that talks about Psalm 23 from a shepherd's eyes, or from a shepherd's point of view. Great book. But it talks about shepherds in that book, about how lowly and how outcast they were.
Yeah.
And so the fact that Jesus, or the angel is, and the host of angels are coming to the lowliest of the low here to announce Jesus' birth. This is a new royal court. Mm-hmm. This is the messengers of God, the first evangelions, the first bearers of the good news, coming to the lowliest of the low to announce the birth of the King of creation. That's just talking about the world being turned upside down and
Absolutely.
Everything turning up on its head. That blows the mind.
Yeah, the shepherds and the women were both not seen as people who could give testimony. They were unreliable sources, unreliable people, and yet this is exactly who Luke believes zones in on, and as the people who are really the ones that are testimonies here, the women and the shepherds.
If you're going to make up a religion, this is not how you get started.
That's it. We've talked about that before. This is not it. What else? Is there anything else that really you got before let's do like one more thing?
Last thing I got, we had 2 songs in Luke 1, and we have a song that shows up again in Luke 2. This one from Simeon, who had been waiting in the temple for, quote, the consolation of Israel. And these are overtones and echoes from Isaiah 40, which starts out, comfort my people. And Luke wants to continue to show us how again, how Jesus is the fulfillment of every dimension of the Old Testament, and including all of Isaiah 40. Isaiah 40 through 55 is really this great section that calls to mind and brings allusions to the top of our mind of the suffering servant and the sacrifice of the suffering servant. Great series of chapters, but at least look at Isaiah 40 if you have time, because we're coming upon Christmas time as well, and that's another great Christmas section of Scripture, along with our Psalm last week, Psalm 45, another great section of Scripture, which will give you the regal and royal king's vision of Christ as he comes into the world. I didn't get a chance to touch on that last week, but Psalm 45 coupled with Psalm 46 this week would be great Psalms readings, just to kind of round things out.
Yeah. The only other thing I had was this section. We really didn't get to, this is beautiful, the part where Jesus is in the temple. I mean, there's so much left in this chapter we didn't even touch on. So please read it thoroughly and and just pray that God will reveal some things to you.
A lot of implications there about him listening to teaching in the temple there too. So don't blow past that.
Don't blow past it. It's all important. The part that it talks about, behold, verse 34. This is Simeon speaking to Mary, his mother. He says, behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rise of many in Israel, and for a sign that for the oppressed. For some reason, I thought to myself, wow, it's like he's being described as a magnet. Jesus is like a magnet. Many are going to fall, many will rise. And it reminded me of of examples. Like Peter repented, and Judas was in despair, as those are the magnet effects. One thief on the cross was blaspheming, and the other thief believed. That's that magnet effect. And so as I committed to myself in my brain, from now on, as I'm reading about Jesus and his character and how he's described as this person who's going to have this magnetic effect of many will rise and many will fall, I want to start paying attention to these polar opposite effects. As I finish reading Luke, I'm going to pay attention to those things. So be ready for it.
I didn't see that either. Incredible.
Awesome. We hope and pray that you guys have a great week in this week's readings, that God will bless you, and that you will have insight with fresh and new eyes as we are reading some familiar passages, especially in the New Testament. We hope that you guys will join us back next week. Hopefully Ellis will be back with us next week. And we do pray for you. I pray for everyone that's reading through the well. And when I open this and I begin to study, I pray for those who are also studying along with us. So thank you for being part of this. Let us know if you have any insights, anything that we missed. We'd love to hear them. We hope you have a great week.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.